Right, I decided to talk about our experience thus far with the medical education and exams, specifically the OSCE, Objective Structured Clinical Examination, at our university. I'm not sure why I'm doing this in the first place. I don't know how long this pandemic will last, or if it will happen again, God forbid, our lifetimes ever. Here it is for the record, at any rate. During these COVID times. We have been using Microsoft Teams, as you might have seen in the previous videos. We've already had some final exams done. We've had around at least 3 to 4 batches worth of students. You can say 500 students at least have taken these exams in this manner. So I wanted to talk about how we did these OSCEs specifically, because we have had other exams, some written exams. Now, in our written exams, we've used some programs like ExamSoft and something called Lockdown Browser, which basically locks down students' browsers so that they wouldn't be able to use any other programs or any browsers or any search engines or anything of the sort. So we had that, and what it also does is I think there's probably another program that basically uses the student's camera webcam. I mean, it's not the most reliable thing in the world, but what it does is it monitors any suspicious movements the student might be doing while taking the exam, such as looking certain directions, or not sure if it monitors speech as well. That's the basic idea, and then it highlights the moments so that you can manually check the video. Anyway, coming back to the OSCE, so what we have done so far, uh, I'll talk about the examination and then maybe I'll talk about the teaching. So for the examination, we've got these teams that we've created. What we've done is we've trained our doctors who are gonna be the examiners, trained them to use Microsoft Teams, and we have brought the doctors who are in fact fewer in number than the candidates. We've brought them and uh, had them seated in certain in computer stations, and they were far away from each other to maintain social distancing, physical distancing, and we had 3 organizers in each such hall. Okay, so each examiner had their own account on Microsoft Teams, and they were members of such a team as this that you see in front of you. Now, before this, we created uh, these teams and these channels that you see over here, numbered from 1 to 6. For each student, we made a specific channel, but the student cannot enter the channel on their own. That's the most important thing, perhaps. Good. Student cannot enter the channel on their own. It's just named after the student. So the members of the team are just the staff, the examiners, the organizers, the IT department, if we needed any help with IT, and some observers if needed, or some role organizing staff. Anyway, so these are the members of the team. As for the students themselves, they are guests. So when you say a guest, it's somebody who does not have access to anything. You just basically go to the channel of the student, you create a meeting. That's what we did. Um, we create a meeting. We call the student. This is what happens beforehand. So the organizers, uh, at the time of the exam, around like half an hour before, something like that, We start calling the students to their respective channels. We have three organizers, so for example, that's 222 or 3 and 3, for example. And we call each student individually and we ask them, we start the recording, we tell them that they're going to be recorded. We start the meeting with them, um, and then we ask them to state their name and show us their ID card to the webcam. Um, the organizers, including myself, we actually knew the students, so even if we couldn't see the picture very clearly, we know students are. Um, but anyway, because some of them don't have a webcam with good resolution, but I mean, I suppose you could ask them to take a picture and show it to you in the chat. Anyhow, so after they state their name and ID, we tell them to show us their desks, and these instructions were provided to them beforehand, so this wasn't something that surprised them. We asked them to show us their desks. We have decided that we wouldn't allow them to take notes during the exam because we don't want we want to minimize how much the students can take from the exam and tell other students about it, and we don't want them to be reading stuff with the excuse that they're actually taking notes. Some students were unhappy about that, but what can we do? Like, it was decided by the examination committee. Anyhow, so after we asked them to show us their desks and the walls around them and surroundings and everything, we tell them that they're not allowed to use their devices and that they're being monitored and the examiner will join them shortly within like 5 minutes or so. And so the students just wait until the examination actually begins. Each room has three organizers. One organizer, for example, is responsible for running the entire thing, for overseeing the of the exam, and different rooms are actually in contact with each other. The organizers are via WhatsApp or calls, or we try to start at the same time, all rooms. And so, as the recording is ongoing, what we did was, because we used to have these physical checklists of things that students should mention, like for example, while taking history. The stations are really easy because it's just like telemedicine basically, or telehealth. Uh, Students are it's just like the physical thing, just like the normal situation where the students take history from simulated. We usually have simulated patients, but in this case, we figured the doctors can take that role instead of the simulated patient. So the doctors are, maybe that's one challenge for doctors who are not trained to be simulated patients, that they will have to be multitasking. The examiner has two windows. One of them is for the Microsoft Teams itself, to have to look at the student, and now maintaining eye contact and body language are things that are perhaps more difficult to assess online. But because you either look at the camera or you look at the screen, and most people are used to looking at the screen, and so we have two windows cascading, like when you drag to the window to the side on each. And so we have Microsoft Windows on one side, and on the other side we have a Google form where we've taken screenshots of checklist sections. For example, how was the student's introduction? Did they mention privacy, confidentiality, that sort of thing? Um, so and we've assigned points, like 0, 1, 2, for example, for each question in the Google form, and that's pretty easy. On the Google form, what we did was we created them beforehand, and they had names of students as well as their ID numbers and their photos, so that as another measure of security and ensuring that the correct student is taking their own exam and somebody else, other than checking their ID card by the organizers. The examiners can actually have a look at the student's face and realize that it's the correct student or not. Anyhow, so we have like 30 seconds for the examiner to talk to the student and tell them, ask them what their name is and tell them what the scenario will be. For example, this patient has come complaining of XYZ. Please take history and then answer the following questions, something like that. So 30 seconds. And I suppose examiners need to be told that they shouldn't. One issue we faced was sometimes some connection problems happen where we end up having to. It didn't happen. I don't think it was even close to 10%. It's probably happened with fewer people than that, much fewer students than that. But if there's a connection issue, and the connection will be strained because so many people are taking the exam at the same time using the university's connection, um, we try to give them some extra time, and that has to be managed because that will likely increase these 30 seconds. Uh, that will cut into the 30 seconds required by, like, for example, if one station one, it's facing a connection problem, and we'd like to give them some, like 10, 15 seconds extra. The other doctors will just waiting. The other stations will be with their students just in silence while that station number one catches up. Anyhow, so yes, the doctor takes the name of the student and they ensure that it's the right one. They tell them what the scenario is. We were thinking we would show them what the scenario is as a as an image, but again, that actually, sharing something, sharing some form of media or a presentation slide, it might take some time and might reach up to 2 minutes sometimes. So we figured we just tell the students and hope that their attention span um, would allow for this, that they would keep in mind what the station is actually about. Um, After that, the station begins. Now, how do we actually time it? So what we do have is we have a voice that says, for example, 5 minutes remaining, and then time is over. Please wait for the station is over. Okay. Um, we have such a recorded voice. I don't know where we got it from. It's been there for a very long time. And we have a PowerPoint presentation that when you press play as a slideshow, it shows up as 7 minutes, for example, or 15. For let's say 7 minutes, and then it becomes 6:30. So every 30 seconds there is a new slide, um, and then we restart. So the overall organizer for the thing is one who presses the button, or anybody can really. So it starts going down, it starts counting time, and at 30-second intervals. I suppose you can make it more frequent than that, but it's up to you, really. Then, once it reaches, for example, 2 minutes remaining, we have the thing that tells the students that there are 2 minutes remaining. We have a sound system, a good sound system, so that examiners can hear the sound of the bell or the dinging or whatever sound um, to have. And if the students don't hear it through the mics of the headset, we've told the examiners to tell the students that 2 minutes remain, for example, so that they can hurry up if there is another task, such as a few questions at the end. The case. Okay. So this is how it goes, right? First of all, the organizers, they organize the one important thing I wanted to mention, that if you have multiple rounds of students, for example, in the first round you've got, let's say, 10 students, in the second round you've got another 10. What you need to do is, during the last station, say it's 7 minutes long, so during the last station, you should start calling the students for during the last station of the first round, you should start calling students for the second round so that they don't have a chance to communicate with each other. first of all, there's of course teaching the examiners how to use Microsoft Teams. We set up the teams themselves. We make channels. We call students to their respective channels, and we start the recording. We do the security check, which is checking the student is correct one and the surroundings of the student, telling them they're being recorded and to stay in their meeting and not leave for any reason or use any other devices. Then the examiners join the students, and we wait until everybody's ready. We have 30 seconds for the examiner to talk to the students, make sure they're the right student, and tell them what the scenario is. And then once these 30 seconds are over, for example, the station is 7 minutes long, they start taking history, for example, or whatever the station is. And that's pretty much it. The station goes, and then there's a PowerPoint that shows the time that's remaining. And when 2 minutes are left, we have a sound system. 2 minutes are left with a bell sound, and we inform the students that 2 minutes remain. And then we have a Google form that we mark the students on. As a summary, that's what we do. There are some other some websites that I've found, like something called OSCE and something called Simulation IQ. I've talked to Simulation IQ before, but they didn't reply to me in time. I'm not sure how feasible that would have been, or if it would have been significantly better. But I think the current method we're using is the most we can do with our current resource without trying to reinvent and retrain the doctors and the staff, because it did take a significant time. Right, so what happens when the station is over? When the station is over, each doctor has a list of students. For example, I'm doctor number one. I'm just gonna talk to student number one and two. Doctor number two is gonna talk to students number three and four, and so on. Okay. So actually, doctor number one, let's say, talks to students number one and two, and doctor number two talks to students number two and one, because we want each student to be talking to an examiner at the same time. So the first examiner talks to the first student, and when the time is over, they talk to the second student. Meantime, second examiner talks to the second student, and then they switch the first student. So that's what happens. Each examiner has a list of students that is numbered separately, so that they were. You should just explain to the examiners that this list that they have. What I want to say is, because let's say, for example, the last examiner, their first student that they're gonna examine is number 6. Then they're gonna go to 5. Okay. Student number 6 is the examiner's first student, but on the list we give him, we say like number 1, like for the examiner, it will be student number 6, for example, has a certain name. So you just tell them that. By the way, why do we number these? The reason we number the channels is because Microsoft Teams just follows the traditional alphabetical order of things that you would find in Windows. So student number 1 could have a name that begins with the letter Z, but they're actually first because they have a number 1 next to it. If you have more than 9 students, then you would have to number them using the convention of like 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, then 0, 9, then it becomes 10, 1, 0. So that's what you have to do. That. What else? So examiners, you could, I suppose, just give the examiners a list of names that says, okay, same list as says that, for example, you start on student number 6, and then you go to 5, then 4, 3, 2, 1, whatever order you want. it depends on how many stations there are and how many doctors are gonna do these stations. It depends on a lot of other factors. Initially, uh, what we were worried about is that we were worried the examiners might not be able to learn how to use Microsoft Teams in a reasonable amount of time. We thought, students might be more adept at using technology because we have some senior examiners, but it was actually fine. It was much better and easier than I thought it would be. And we thought we didn't want students to be left unattended, so we wanted them to stay in the channels rather than as compared to the doctors being in their own channels and the students moving from one channel to the next. We found that this is actually easier for students to just be recorded and for examiners instead to move from one channel to the next. Now I have some recommendations if anybody wants to do this. You should have each student's pictures up because you want to add it to the. But other than that, more importantly, you should have each student's phone number, and you should have a phone that's ready for use, multiple phones ready for use at any time, because some students had basically hopeless connections that you couldn't do anything about, and we had to end up calling them on their phones. So I know that we had told them not to use their phones. They can just throw it their bed or put it somewhere where they're not using it. And if there's a connection problem, we can type to them like we're gonna call you, or we can tell them as, as like we can tell them using the mics and tell them to pick up their phone because you know, it's better than wasting your time trying to say, "Can you hear? Can you hear me?" So yeah. Um, Students who absolutely had no hope of using an online connection told to come to the university and use the university's internet, but we had them stay in another room. So it was a room in the university, and just for the sake of fairness, rather than making it a physical examination, now that they've come to the university with a negative COVID result that's quite recent, like as in yesterday or something. Um, so we told these students to stay in a room and use a computer inside the university because their connections were bad. We also suggested, I don't know if we've had such incidents where we had to to purchase devices for students or, lend them a device of our own that we own university. But yeah, that's also possible. I think we wanted to contact the telecommunications company and ask them for a better internet connection, but I think it went well. Well, it went better than expected, I suppose. So we didn't have to resort to that.